I'm Natalie. I'm 14 years old and I'm dyslexic.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump into the first question. Do you remember how you felt when you were first told you were dyslexic?
Quite honestly, I felt like broken inside. It made me feel weak. It made me feel like I couldn't do anything in my life, that I would pretty much amount to nothing. And I don't know, like a wave of just straight up like burden like hit me and just completely made me like fall. It was rough, and I was also really young, so it didn't help to that.
What would you say are your biggest challenges and how have you learned to cope with them?
Well, I am not only dyslexic, I have an auditory processing disorder.
Okay.
So I would say definitely like hearing things, my brain like switches them up in a very different way and definitely makes room for a lot of misunderstandings. I would also find that reading informational text for me is also really difficult because that's just how it is. Like making stories, being creative is kind of a bonus to dyslexia. It's a good thing, but when you're reading information, you're kind of just you're trying to find the creativity behind it, and you feel like you're reading from a robot. At least I do. To cope with that, I've had to do like these 1 minute readings to better my reading of informational text, and I've had to push myself to read more things that are informational just so then it like gets better.
Could you talk about your mindset with dyslexia? You kind of talked about it a little bit, but would you say your mindset's improved as you've gotten older, or it's kind of stayed the same?
I've kept having like when I was younger, yeah, I felt like it was a huge burden. And then growing up and maturing and all of these things, quite frankly, I didn't start telling people that I was dyslexic, like just straight up coming out with it until like this year, freshman year.
Mhm.
But yeah, my mindset has definitely changed because I used to find it to be like a big weakness. And now I don't. I find it as something that makes me stronger, makes me stand out. And my dad kind of brought up this analogy of you're given this sword and your sword is dyslexia, and you sharpening your sword is you doing every single thing that you can to make that sword stronger, and how there will be challenges that make divots in that sword, but you've got to flatten out those challenges. You've got to push past it just to make your sword as perfect as can be.
So, did you ever realize that you were having trouble in school at first, or did it just come as a surprise and you found out you were dyslexic?
The way my story started is so my younger brother could read a lot better than me, and
Mhm.
he was a year younger than me, and he was reading chapter books when I was like 7 and he
Mhm.
was 6. He was reading he was reading Narnia. He was reading the
Wow.
Narnia chapter books. And I couldn't do it. My dad would give me this book and I couldn't read it at all. And my older brother was able to read it. Literally every single person but me and my family was able to read it. And so when my dad would ask me to read, I would just go straight off of memory. And my parents knew something was up because I was jumping all around the story, and
Yeah.
they were like, this is not part of this chapter, something's going on with her. And my dad is a diagnosed dyslexic now, but he didn't get diagnosed until after they found out I was dyslexic,
Mhm.
and my grandma is dyslexic. And so like it's just been a trait that's been passed down. I had absolutely no idea. I just felt like something
Mhm.
was wrong with me, and I thought it would get better and I would work past it, but my parents knew something was up and they knew it wasn't normal.
Do you feel like your school is supportive of your dyslexia?
I definitely feel like they could be a lot more supportive
Mhm.
because yeah, right now high school is better because the
Mhm.
teachers will pull you over and be like, "Hey, I was reading over your 504 plan. How do you want to go about these things?" But
Right.
when you're in elementary school, like when I was a
Mhm.
5th grader, these middle school counselors would come to the elementary school, pull me out of class, pull me with my mom. I had zero idea what was going on,
Yeah.
and they would talk down to me and they would belittle me and make me feel like I was an idiot. They don't do well with people who are different and people who learn differently. They just don't do well. They think those people should mimic themselves and try and mold themselves into that kind of learning, which if you're dyslexic you can't do. You learn
Right.
in a very different way. The school definitely could do a lot better with how they handle people with dyslexia, because other than 8th grade year they didn't do anything.
Mhm.
You had to learn how to be your own self-advocate.
Right, yeah.
And with dyslexia, there are a lot of parents who don't know what it is, how to help their child, how to get their child the best that they can. And so it makes it really difficult when you don't have the school's side either. You have to fight, you have to turn your child into their own educational self-advocate.
Can I ask, if you attend public school or private school
I
currently?
attend public school. I go to
Okay.
Sequoia.
Okay, me too. I was just wondering, it sounds like we have similar experiences, so
Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to ask that. What do you think your school could do better to help kids with dyslexia? You kind of mentioned it before, but if you could just explain a little bit more.
I think personally that they could provide a lot like different ways of learning, like not having teachers like completely change their ways of learning, but like sitting down with that child, explaining to them what this means without belittling them or making them feel small or making them feel stupid and trying to strip them away of what they need. Because quite frankly, that's what the school does. If you have all of these lists of just accommodations after accommodations, they're going to try and take out everything because it means less money that the school has to put in for you. I think what the school could do better is instead of looking at it from a money's perspective, they could look at it from what is going to make this child the best that they can be? What is going to make this child successful in life? How can we teach them to be their own self advocate, teach them how they learn, teach them how to be better and all of these things. Like if they would just put in a little bit of effort, it would go a really long way because like I mentioned earlier, not many parents know how to handle their child with dyslexia.
Right.
So instead of like rigging tests that you take with them to make you seem fine when you're not fine, like fix it so then it's not. It's
Mhm.
a true testament of what it is,
Mhm.
how to help. So
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. It kind of goes along with what you're saying, but is there anything specifically that teachers can do better to help us?
So me specifically, I don't personally think so because through my dyslexic journey, I've had to learn how to be my own self-advocate
Right.
to a point where like in high school where my teachers are like, "Hey, how can we do this, this, and this?" And I'm like, "I will let you know when I need this, this, and this because I sometimes use them, but I don't let dyslexia define me."
Hmm.
Just because like a lot of there has been a stereotype that anybody with dyslexia is stupid,
Yeah.
and that is so not true
It's
at
not,
all.
yeah.
What I back up behind that is like Albert Einstein, dyslexic, Abraham Lincoln, dyslexic. Some of the brightest minds in the entire world were dyslexic. But I think what the teachers can do better is that they can just not make it seem like we're alone. Like we have somebody that will go through and have our backs through the experience. And truthfully, that's what we look for because when your teachers are like, hey, because especially at my school, hey, how many adults can you go to in this school when you have a problem or anything?
Hmm.
There are very few people that I know who would be like counselor, principal,
Yeah.
they would say, "This teacher or this teacher," and why? And it's because those teachers would have your back, and if you're dyslexic, that's one of the biggest things that you need.
Yeah, it is 100%. What was your experience when you were tested for dyslexia, if you remember?
The first time I got tested, the thing that I can remember is I went into this room with this
Hmm.
huge brown table, and it had all these chairs around it, and it had this the room was just covered in windows. And it was a white room and there was a clock and there was only one door, and I remember walking my dad into this computer room that just had a bunch of these computer monitors everywhere so he could watch the camera that was inside and see his child suffering. I remember sitting there looking out the window, having this doctor sit right in front of the window and just start testing me. She pulled out these books, flipped them over, and was like, "What do you see here? What do you see here? Say these words backwards." Then I remember her coming in to my dad, pulling my dad into the hallway and being like, "Hey, she didn't pass any of them. She failed." Yeah, the first time I got tested, it was hard. I will not lie. Out of all of the tests I've ever taken in my life, that was the hardest test I've ever taken because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't
Right.
know what was wrong with me. I just couldn't answer any of the questions.
And how old were you when you got tested?
I was 7 I was either 7 or 8.
What accommodations do you find most helpful in school?
Extra time.
Mhm.
I use extra time on literally almost every single test that we have, but only for midterms or milestones, especially. And when you share this with people, like milestones and EOCs, that is when you need to use that
Yeah.
because you usually get a standard hour and a half or an extended 30 minutes after that. But if you're dyslexic, you get 3 hours
Mhm.
to take that test plus another hour of extended time. And it is so helpful because it lets you read through the questions, analyze, think of it in a smart way. It truly is like a lifesaver.
Especially when you start taking the ACT and the SATs,
Yeah.
it comes in handy for sure. I wouldn't be able to finish half the test if I had to take it with the regular time.
Yeah.
So,
And I know like for my school at least, when I have to take my PSATs and SATs,
mhm,
they're gonna put me in a completely different location that's like
mhm.
30 minutes away because I have to have that extra time and I have to be in a quiet testing environment. And a quiet testing environment is another one that is really beneficial because
Mhm.
especially for me and how I process things, like auditory processing, when there's like tapping or thudding or any type of noise, my brain will revert to that. And so having a quiet testing environment and extra time is the two most beneficial things I can say with your accommodations.
Yeah, they really come in handy. All right, so last question. Do you have any advice for a current dyslexic kid who just found out they're dyslexic, going through it, and they might be struggling a little bit? Do you have any advice for them?
My advice for that kid would be it's gonna be hard. It is the hardest challenge you will ever go through in life. Not just mentally, but spiritually, because it will rattle you to your core because it will make you feel weak. But the biggest piece of advice is to never stop fighting because there's always something that you can do to sharpen your sword.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something that you can do to advocate for yourself. And you've got it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt that you've got it because you're a human being. You're gonna make mistakes along the way. That's part of it. But you should never stop fighting. That's how it works. When you are dyslexic and you have this reoccurring problem, the fight is never over. You never need to make it be over. It will never be over. But you gotta push through those challenges and eventually you will find peace with yourself and you will find happiness and you will feel like you have conquered a part of the battle and that's all you want.